Firstly, I'd like to thank Reverend Shannon for your amazing talk last week. It was amazing to hear about, Bodhi Day during the season. I feel like it often gets left out. I'm just so happy and proud to be a part of a church that acknowledges all of these different faith traditions. And, this winter solstice season, I think, perhaps more than any other season, captures the fact that, no matter what part of the world we're from, for whatever reason, especially in this northern hemisphere during this time of year, there's so many different similarities to this season and this time of year where we're walking through this winter season. I love this song, Gotta Let Your Soul Shine, better than sunshine, better than moonshine. And sure as hell better than rain. But I gotta let y'all know though, like I've been loving this rain, and it's weird because Rebecca and I both. I think we're officially pluviophiles. Is anyone familiar with that word? It's a word I learned about just a few years ago. It simply means someone who loves rain or finds peace of mind and joy during rainy days. Any other pluviophiles in the house? I guess you got to if you live up here. There's some hands that are like, no, I can't wait to see the sun again. But it's not just the rain that's so interesting about living up here. It's in the wintertime. We are so far north. It's the fact that these days are short, man. Like, it feels like, the sun's coming up at around 9 o'clock and it's already going down again at 4. If I was still commuting to work, I live in the parsonage house, so my commute's pretty quick. But I probably would be driving home and, to and from work in the dark. Like, it's a pretty, interesting time to be living up in the Pacific Northwest. It's always like this during the winter. But, these shorter days and longer nights, I know they all impact us in different ways, but I got to say, I am here for it, y'all. I absolutely love this time of year. And I don't know exactly what it is, but what I notice is, what I find is this time of year, it's almost like this energy, and perhaps it's the fact that these days are so short. It's almost like it's just calling me inward in a different way than normal, right? I can feel my energy coming just right here, like at the center of my being, just calling me to just slow down, to take a deeper, longer breath and to reconnect, And in many ways, y'all, this past 2 years of living through this pandemic have felt like a little bit of an extended winter. There has felt a little like there's just been a little more darkness. And it actually reminded me of this show, Game of Thrones. Did anybody get into Game of Thrones a few years ago? My wife, Rebecca, and I were a little obsessed. But I can remember, in that show, the whole premise, a major premise of the show is, that their season, not their, television show seasons, but, their actual seasons, last for years at a time, right? That winter wasn't just, a few months, but it lasted for years. And I can remember feeling how fantastical that was, and weird that was, but I was like, oh, well, the same thing happened in Narnia, right? So I guess that wasn't the first time I was introduced to that. But it also reminded me oh yeah, this past couple years, we've kind of been invited into a way of being, which Janine so beautifully really captured in that reading, that I think normally is kind of, reserved for just a few months out of the year, but we've been doing it for 2 years now, slowing down, reading, learning how to cook our own food a little bit more. I find that this past 2 years, as challenging as it's been, as isolated as we've been sometimes, it's really called us to this deeper place of contemplation that I have to say has been really beneficial in a lot of ways as well. That has helped some things to come to the surface, both individually and collectively, that perhaps could not have. I think about the Black Lives Matter movement, which started way before this pandemic, but didn't really catch fire until we all slowed down enough to where we could actually look at the systemic racism that exists in our country, right? And there's so many other things that have come to light during this time, and I think it is because we've been living through a time where we've been asked to slow down just long enough to really look at what's going on, to looking at what's working, and also be brave enough, perhaps because we've been forced to, but to look long enough at what is not. And that can be a gift. And it can feel hard, but here's what I find, y'all. This season, there's so much instruction in how to do this well, right? Religious traditions from around the world have been teaching us and guiding us how to walk through this time. Not just so we can get to the spring, but so we can really allow something within us to build and actually to be like reinforced and to be nurtured through this time, through this darkest time of the year. Like, it makes sense that the winter solstice is one of the oldest celebrations like on planet Earth. Like, it's been around forever. And it's sometimes easy, like in our modern lives, to forget that, like, you know, hey, we humans, even though it doesn't feel like it, like, hey, we're part of the earth too, right? And that the seasons are a part of who we are on this primal level. And, you know, our ancient ancestors understood this in a different way. Because they are hunters and gatherers, right? Like, their lives were spent outdoors, and the seasons and the weather played a huge role in their lives. Like, because of this, the sun was revered by many and even worshipped. You know, the people of Northern Europe viewed the sun as a giant dial, like a wheel in the sky that turned to the seasons. The term Yule, which we hear a lot during this time, comes from hul, or the ancient Norse word for wheel. And it wasn't just the Northern Europeans who marked the winter solstice as a holy, holy day, right? The ancient Romans reveled in this time, in the turning of the seasons. And they would have huge feasts where, like, all the customs were, like, turned on their heads, and everybody's roles got reversed, and they got draped in greenery and lit candles. Druids and Celtic priests originated the Yule log, which they believed conquered, you know, like the evil that they believed was like more around during these 12 days where the sun stood still around the winter solstice. And even like this tradition of the mistletoe, which were cut from oak trees, that came out of the Celtic and Druid times because they utilized it as a way to make peace. Right, to put down our conflict, and mistletoe actually was a way to, like, make peace between one another. Now we just use it for an excuse for making out, but, you know, you can see where, you know, it started, you know, a little different, you know, but you can make peace and make out, you know, that's good too. And in Japan, I think it's one of my favorite things. Japan, they have this. My ancient ancestors, they celebrated this holiday called Toji, where they basically just took long baths that were filled with yuzu and citrus, right? Like, this may explain my obsession with hot springs. It's like in my DNA or something. But that sounds so good, doesn't it? Just like a warm, hot bath filled with citrus. Like, I'm down for that. But you can see how, like, these ancient rituals are all calling us into this more contemplative space. They're all saying, like, hey, don't resist this time. Like, create ritual that bring warmth inward. Like, bring light into your house. Bring nature into your space, right? So this reverence for trees and greenery and candles and warmth and warm beverages and fires, you know, and festivals, this all comes out of the ancient traditions of old, right? You know, next Sunday, we're going to be doing a very contemplative service. It's not like normal services. It's a Taizé-inspired service. So there's not going to be a talk. You know, there's the music is all going to be sort of slower chants. And we're really inviting everyone into this contemplative space that I think the whole world, when you look at the natural world, it's all calling us into this space. So, you know, I invite you all to come back. It's the day after Christmas Day. But I invite you all to come back and spend an hour with us doing this ritual. So a ritual I've been doing on the daily, we have 2 fireplaces in the parsonage house, but we have been utilizing those fireplaces. We've been building a fire like every single day and every single night in our house. And I find like this act of like building and starting and tending to a fire has been one of my most favorite rituals that I think has just like lit up so much in me in this past month or so. And it's always amazing to me, like, that just one little spark, one little flame is all it takes when a fire is properly prepared. And just like a few minutes later, it can be raging and warming your house and bringing peace of mind and just burning brightly. And what's cool is, like, you can't just let it go, right? You can't just, like, let it go, like, light the fire and expect that it's going to do its thing. It's kind of like Reverend Shannon spoke to last week when she was talking about enlightenment. It's not like we're just, like, reach enlightenment and then we're like, yeah, we've arrived. I'm just enlightened and I'm just levitating through life. I have no more worries or troubles. No, it's like, no, it's a daily practice. We have to wake up literally and figuratively every single day. Every single day. And it requires that kind of lifelong journey. Similarly, like, we have to stir the logs, add new ones, bring actual breath into the fire, like breathe into the fire, especially when it's about to extinguish, and let that symbiotic relationship between air and fire really flow. And it reminds me of the message of this time from all these winter solstice rituals that human beings have been engaging in for millennia, that somehow this time of year, it's reminding us to tend to this inner flame within us. Like, we have to spark it, yes, like we have to realize that it's there, but we also have to tend to it. We have to nurture it. We have to prepare for it, right? Which is what the season of Advent from the Christian tradition is all about. It's about this preparation time for new life, for new light coming into the world. And so even if we're only experiencing this thing as like a faint light right now, or perhaps it's just like a potential of a spark, then perhaps this shows up as like maybe a lifelong dream that hasn't fully come into being yet. Perhaps it's like a new career or job that you know is your calling, but everything hasn't fallen into place quite yet for that to happen. Or perhaps it's a new relationship or a new way of being in your current one. Or perhaps it's more subtle than that, right? Perhaps it's more internal than that. Just like beginning of a way of seeing and being yourself that just feels like a small little flicker at the deepest sense of yourself. Perhaps it's a strength within that feels still just a little dormant, or an inspiration within that has fully developed, or perhaps it's just simply a yearning for a deeper peace or fulfillment of meaning or healing, right? Whatever it is for you. The season of Advent, this winter solstice time, is inviting us to really care for that small little flame, right? To tend that to it and to prepare for it to grow. Preparing ourselves for all of the fruits that can come from that. Just like the stories of old have talked about preparing ourselves for the spring and have talked about the preparation for a new light in the world, so too can we prepare a place within us, right? So I ask you all, really, like right now, like what is awaiting your preparation? Like what new light in life is seeking to come into your being right now? What is seeking to make itself known, not just as a flicker or a glimmer, but as something that grows and reaches every corner and cell of your being, so that this time can be a time where you are being transformed and transfigured, where that little light that feels just like the beginning of something can actually grow, can actually just transform you from the inside out, right? This time of year reminds me of when I went to Waldorf teacher training school. I only lasted 1 year. I realized I didn't actually want to be a high school teacher. That actually became like my nightmare. But I thought I was going to do that for a while. So, some people are beauty school dropouts. I'm a Waldorf school dropout. But I loved the education, though. I have to say, I loved the education that I got. And one of my favorite pieces was we studied this little book of poems called Calendar of the Soul. And it's a little book that has a poem for each week of the year. And it just kind of follows the rhythm of nature and the way that exists within us, and sort of this journey of the soul and our interaction and our relationship with that soul part of us. And so I wanted to read you the poem that is designated for this week, this time of year. It's one of my favorite poems of all time. So this is how it goes. This is the blissful striving of my heart's desire, to carry the light of the Spirit into cosmic winter night, so that sparkling seeds of my soul may take root in cosmic soil, and that the word of God may resound through the darkness of my senses, transfiguring my entire existence. There's so much there. I think what it reminds me is, like, even just a small seed, even just like the glimmer of a new thought or a new hope for ourselves, or a new way of being, or a new way of feeling, like that's taking root right now in this cosmic soil. And so even if it feels like whatever path that we see is at the end, or whatever fruit that we hope comes from this tiny seed, even if it feels far, far away, we can know, like, during this time, like, it's being germinated, right? Like, it's actually, everything is happening in order for it to continue to grow, right? And the way it talks about, the way this whole calendar works is in the summer months, it's all about, basking in the warmth of the sun and all of the fruits of that, and really, like, taking part in all of this activity of life, and really being active in that. And in the winter months, right, the winter solstice, it asks us to take the energy of that sun, and the whole idea is in order for the sun to survive through the winter, like, we actually have to take that light that goes away during the winter, and we have to literally, like, just be stewards of it and carry it within ourselves through the night so that it does not go out. I love that. I love that not only is it like something that's happening in the natural world, it's happening within us too. Like, we're being called to actually cultivate those things that are being called forth from us to be lit up from within, right? Like, we're actually being called to carry that light and that warmth and that life in us so that it doesn't go out. Like, we have to be the harbingers of that light, and we have to be the ones to carry it through this dark time, right? And perhaps this past couple years, we've had to do that for a little bit longer than normal, but we can know that, like, the end is coming. Like, as far as, like, the end of this pandemic, I know that, like, that it feels like it's going on forever, but we can feel it. We can see how things are changing and shifting, even with the way that things arise. Like, we can still, in the middle of this, not give up our hope, and know that, like, this time is giving us something, that we are being gifted by that, right? So I think this is why, when we talk about this, every time we go through a winter solstice, it's an opportunity for transformation. It's an opportunity for us to really think about who we are and who we want to be. It's an opportunity for us to really contemplate, like, what's not working in my life? What do I need to let go of? And God, what do I want more of? Like, who are the people out there that I want to be more like, that I want to emulate? And to know that, like, this is the time to do that. This is the time where we can actually walk through a threshold, cross over it, and take part in this rite of passage, and that we are planting seeds that we know will bloom and grow, and that will continue to grow through, the darkness of the winter season. I think this is why Rebecca and I, almost 7 years ago, decided to do this little rogue wedding before our big like crazy 150-person wedding. We snuck off, and we did our own little rogue wedding on the winter solstice. We were living in Denver at the time, and we knew that we just had to do this, and we didn't tell anybody. So we just invited our one friend, Eugene, and we drove from Denver down to Santa Fe. It's about a 6-hour drive. And we decided to do our wedding not inside the church, but outside of the church, where there's like this labyrinth right outside the church. And it's outside this historic basilica right in downtown Santa Fe. It's like 500 years old. It's one of the most gorgeous structures I've ever seen. But there was no pressure. There was no time schedule. There was no guests. There was no food menu. There was no logistics that we had to worry about. It was just us. And we happened to be, when we didn't have even like a time frame for getting ready, but by the time we had driven up there and gotten ready and started walking from our hotel, to the basilica, the sun was coming down. And we didn't know, so we bought little candles just in case. And so, as it was getting darker and darker, the candles began to be the only source of light so that we could see each other's faces, right? And so we walked the labyrinth together. And for those of you who don't know what a labyrinth is, it's kind of like a maze, but there's only one way in and one way out, and you can't get lost. But it's been used, throughout different cultures throughout time as like a contemplative practice, kind of, mirroring the twists and turns of life, right? And you get to the center of it, and it's often a place where you say a prayer or come to a new realization. And, we got to the center, we did our little ceremony, and it was crazy because the moment we said our I do's, there was like mass going on inside the church while we were doing our little rogue ceremony outside the church. And the second we said our I do's, the bells started ringing because the mass had just ended. It was pure. And then all these people started coming out, as if it was like everyone was like celebrating our wedding, but they had no idea what was going on, of course. It's like, oh, hey, good for you all to show up. And we walked, out of the labyrinth together. And it felt like a rite of passage for me, perhaps one of the most important rites of passage of my life, like I felt my identity shift in that ceremony. I knew my identity was like I was a husband now, I was a partner, I was a teammate, and I also knew like I had this amazing partner that loved me and that was committing to me and that I would be changed by that commitment to love and being loved. And I realized, like in that moment too, like this is the way it's always been with this thing called God, with this thing called the divine, that it's always been this way, like it's all like this kind of covenant, this kind of commitment of love and receiving love and being a place of love in the world, like that's always been present. So I didn't need to get married to like remember that. Like you don't have to be married to realize that. But it was a huge rite of passage for me. And it was the moments where like I knew after that, like I wouldn't be the same. And so, the invitation is, everybody, during this dark time of year, is to actually allow ourselves to be transformed. To actually allow ourselves to plant the seeds that we need to plant so that we can live the life that we know that we are being called to live. And that can bring up fear. That can bring up excitement. That can bring up nervousness. That can bring up joy and a peace that we've never known before. But when we're being called to go within, my suggestion is that we just do that. Like when we're feeling a pull, instead of resisting it, why not just go with it? Why not allow the natural rhythm of the seasons and the universe itself to bring us back home to where we know we've belonged from the beginning anyways? So I'm going to close with a quote from Bell Hooks. Oh, Bell Hooks. I was really, really impacted, just sad to hear of her passing this past week. For myself, she's been one of the most important teachers and writers in my life. Like, she's opened my eyes in ways that I feel like indebted to her, and even though we've never met, you know what I mean? And I know Reverend Shannon feels the same way, and so many people I know feel the same way. But she was someone who I want to continue to hold the torch for. I know that she lit a fire in me that I do not want to let out. I want to make sure that it does not get extinguished. I want to make sure that light continues on in the world. And so I just want to share one of my favorite quotes from you that I feel really captures this time of year as well. Here's what she says. My hope emerges from those places of struggle where I witness individuals positively transforming their lives and the world around them. And I end with this, y'all, because this isn't just about personal transformation. I think when we come to a point where we are beginning to live with meaning, with purpose, with the sense of dignity that I think Bell Hooks really talked about a lot, when we begin to do that, we can't help but also engage in the world in a different way and see everyone as our sibling, as our friend, as someone who we also know is a part of our human family. And so that's why, we're a center and we're a spiritual center and a church that can't not also engage in justice work. And I love that we're just unapologetic about that. Because what I know is that our spiritual paths have to, at some point, be done in community, that we're not here preaching politically. We're just saying part of our spiritual growth is engaging in the world in a way where we know that our lives are also enriched by that, right? And so here's what I know too. As we begin to cultivate and plant these seeds right now, like, the world is also being transformed, and we're being called to be a deeper part of this human family.